Hey everyone, Darren here, and welcome to my review for CK3's Royal Court expansion. I just want to mention here at the top that I don't work with Paradox anymore, so my reviews are always a little bit late, but this one is especially behind as my PC's broken down several times recently, setting things back even further. Hopefully though, this review will help people who are still on the fence, or maybe just curious during future sales of the game, or just want to talk Crusader Kings. More on that at the end of the video, but let's just get started with the review now. So, Paradox have an interesting habit of muddying the information about what is and isn't in the DLC. Royal Court for CK3 released on the 8th of February, and it brought with it 7 major new features, at least that I've identified. Number 1, the Royal Court Throne Room has been added for Kingdom and Empire rank feudal titles, so if you're tribal, even if you're a tribal empire, the Royal Court is not available to you. The court is a fully 3D scene, which you can view at any time, and there's 4 variations of it based on your culture. Number 2, when accessible, you can hold court every 5 years, whereby your subjects will petition you with their problems and you'll have to make decisions to help resolve them. Number 3, if you're a duke and you don't have your own court, you can still petition your liege to visit their court and ask them for a specific position. You can also pay homage to them, or homage, granting both them and you benefits. Number 4, the Royal Court has a status called Grandeur. Ranging from 1 to 100, as you build up court grandeur, you reap bigger and bigger benefits. You can increase grandeur through events and artifacts, but also by setting the court amenities for fashion, food, lodgings, and servants. Nothing actually changes visually with this, but the higher the expenses on those amenities, the more benefits and grandeur your court will accumulate. Number 5, the Royal Court also has unique artifacts that can be placed inside of it. Thrones, banners, weapons, armor, these can all be placed and viewed inside the court that offer up different benefits and have their own history of where they've been in the world. Occasionally, characters will have inspirations allowing them to create artifacts for you. Number 6, the Royal Court DLC also gives players more options regarding culture. You can reform your culture to change pretty much everything about it for a cost. This includes the ethos, the cultural pillars, and the traditions. You can also diverge your culture, which in effect means you're splitting it, or you can hybridize it, which in effect means merging them. Number 7, lastly, the DLC adds a new counselor task to the Chancellor, the Marshal, and the Steward, as well as a new Dynasty Legacy chain and 5 traditions to the Culture Tradition pool. And that is it for the DLC. That is what you're actually paying for. Just to be very clear about the features that came alongside of it that aren't part of this DLC, the free update has added 5 new major features. Number 1, the cultural overhaul. Now cultures have an acceptance level of each other, an ethos, pillars, and traditions. Players can establish new traditions, adding from a pool of over 90. They can also promote acceptance with the steward. Number 2, languages. You can now learn a language to gain greater opinion and cultural acceptance of those that speak that language. Number 3, inventory. You now have a personal inventory where you can add inventory artifacts. Artifacts offer up bonuses and buffs but degrade over several decades. They can be stolen and claimed and used for bartering as gifts or ransoms. And they can even be fought over in personal duels. They can also be commissioned and created through a decision. Number 4, a coat of arms designer has been added, allowing you to customize your house, dynasty, and title flags with quite a lot of depth. And number 5, a new list of court positions have been added, such as bodyguards, lady of the house, court jester, and many, many more. So, I wanted to outline all of that right there at the top so you know exactly what you're paying for. Paradox often confuse the message by listing the free features in their Steam pages for DLC, and it's essentially false marketing for people who just might be looking to pick up the game in a few months or years, and they want to know what the DLC actually adds to the game they bought. Now, I know some people will probably argue that, well, you're paying for the free features in a way through DLC, well then it's not really free. Really, the base game is supposed to be supporting the free features. People are still buying the base game. Anyways, so let's talk about the DLC and whether it's any good. First, we have the Royal Court itself, this 3D room where people mostly just stand still. Nobody walks around or moves from their spot, and this makes the place visually feel very sterile. One has to wonder how this is really any different from an event window in terms of what the player gets out of it. The camera angles are fixed and nobody moves, so I'm not entirely sure what the whole point of this was. There's also some notable events that take place outside of the court, such as wedding celebrations or feasts. That makes the Royal Court feel like it's only there just for choosing dilemmas and seeing your artifacts. Often the dilemmas you're faced with shows you the backs of the characters as they kneel to you on the throne. It means you can't see their expressions or how they feel about things, the way an actual event window normally does. Now, I can commend Paradox for trying to do something quite ambitious for their team. The idea of a 3D courtroom where people visit and petition you and sit there and decide the fate of the kingdoms matters, that's quite cool in premise, but in execution it's just a little bit underwhelming. The events themselves that are created are, you know, a mixed bag. Some can be really quite interesting tales and a very fun read and quite immersive, and then there seem to be a lot of them as well, which is great, but I couldn't help but feel that the whole royal courtroom was just disconnected from the reality of the world. The events are just kind of randomly generated when you click that button for different people, not really taking enough context into account. I had just had a civil war with my brother, and 2 months later here he was petitioning me for some random thing, as if that brutal war had never just happened. You know, we hated each other and it just didn't seem to factor in. Now, when you hold court during a war, there's no discussion about how it's going, or what can we do, or how I'm being viewed as a ruler. Rarely there is some outside context provided, but it does little to actually feel like the court is alive with discussion or the situation at the time. When at war, I'd kind of expect the people to kind of come to me and say, hey, we've been recently raided, or events related to people who want to join the cause or get caught deserting, or something like that. A war council even could be quite cool, and actually it's something that other Paradox games have done in the past. You sort of just resort to clicking the button, which always generates 3 dilemmas, and you choose whatever gives you the best effect. Now, I know that's a bit of a gamey way of looking at things, but when the event lacks broader context, it does just kind of become a what effect am I gonna get button that you click every 5 years. There's also the bugs. Several times I had bugs with missing text, broken event chains, and even a situation where I was petitioning myself. The chair was empty and I had to just choose between myself and another person who were bickering about something. Now, it was just totally immersion breaking, and normally I'd try to forgive it, but this DLC is at a premium cost, so this was just quite disappointing to see. One of the driving factors of my enjoyment for CK3 is role-playing, and events really help shape the story of your character's life, so I'm thrilled that Royal Court has so many new events and dilemmas, but I guess it's just their delivery can feel a little bit disjointed. However, there are also events that occur somewhat randomly every year, or so, that you can answer in the Royal Court, and these are excellent. These are great, they usually have some context towards them, and it makes the court feel like people have arrived to give you some sort of dilemma, rather than, you know, clicking a button and generating them. Next up is the actual court mechanics, and this is an aspect I really enjoyed. As mentioned before, you can set your level of amenities in the court, enriching the food for better health, improving the lodging so guests will stay around longer, increasing the servants so as to improve your scheme power. I guess they're listening into the conversations and reporting it back to you. These effects themselves all felt quite good, and not just minor modifiers. Despite the numbers seemingly being small, I definitely felt the effects, and what's better is the meta progression of the grandeur of the court itself. The better those amenities, the higher the grandeur, but it takes time to build, and events and actions can influence a sudden increase or decrease. I think I had one where someone took a crap in the court, and it just stank up the place for like a year, lowering the grandeur. Stuff like that is just fun, and you know, it actually makes the gameplay more interesting and a bit less predictable when things can kind of jolt it either way. As the grandeur builds, you then get greater bonuses and effects, with people respecting you more and generally having a greater opinion of you, while you also build up prestige and renown a little bit faster, allowing you to progress your dynasty legacies. Now, I'd worry that maybe it's subject to being balanced a bit, as the effects do seem powerful, but I think it might be actually balanced out by the different court positions already that cost you a lot more gold for upkeep, and the various changes to culture requiring a lot of prestige to get things done. You're definitely building up more prestige than you ever did before, but there are things now to spend it on that weren't there before as well. On the whole, advancing grandeur feels like very rewarding progression, and it's not always easy to push it all the way up, as financial setbacks mean you're going to have to cut those costs, and grandeur will fall back down. I did, however, find it quite easy to stay above the expected grandeur, which is sort of like a metric the game expects you to be at, and going over it rewards you greatly. That definitely needs to be tuned a bit, I think. The expectation of grandeur needs to kind of catch up to your financials and maybe to the size or rank of your realm a bit more. I'm actually not sure what influences the expectation, but I was always way above it. The next topic is artifacts. These are in effect just items with rarity value, but they provide different benefits. I think these are a fantastic addition, and they are in the base game, but they are in the DLC. They have a subcategory called court artifacts, so normally you just have them on your personal self. Now you get to have them in your court as well if you have the DLC. These ones will have 3D models and they can be placed in various slots around your throne room, but what's really nice touch is that they can be created through inspirations. Artisans will show up with an inspiration. You can pay to fund the creation of new artifacts, even sometimes creating things that are personalized to you, such as house banners or tapestries that show your specific coming to power. These can then be claimed, gifted, or stolen and displayed on other people's courts, so there's this really nice world continuity to them. They also degrade over time and can be reforged and restored with the antiquarian job, so it just feels like a really well thought out, solid feature. In terms of culture, as mentioned, most of the culture changes are free, however the DLC allows you to interact with culture a bit more. Normally you can only add new traditions, but with the Royal Court DLC you can actually change the fundamentals of a culture, including its ethos, pillars, acceptance levels, and traditions. This offers a lot of customization to your culture, but it also takes a long time the more drastic the changes are. The traditions need to have certain requirements to make it happen. For instance, you can't be mountain fighters if your culture isn't made up of a percentage of mountains, which is a great way of doing it. Instead of saying you needed 10 mountain counties or something, it's actually a percentage, so you really have to be a mountain-dwelling people to get the traditions of that. Really great. But where the DLC really comes in is in splitting your culture or merging it. This in effect allows you to cut the costs of taking on traditions by just adopting those of a similar culture much more quickly. And you'll see the AI doing this out in the world quite regularly, which makes for just a greater sandbox experience. Now I'll admit, I didn't actually interact with culture too much during my playthrough other than taking on some traditions and changing the ethos, but looking through the mechanics for diverging and splitting it, it seems to be a very worthwhile addition, if a little overbearing as you get to grips with all the various effects. The real place this can shine for those less familiar with CK3 is that you can potentially just gather up various unique men-at-arms by merging into cultures that have them, greatly diversifying your armies. And those are really the major interactions I had with the DLC. Of course, you'll notice effects when the times are needed for the smaller mechanics, such as using the Chancellor's Bestow Royal Favor, which is accessible after you build up your grandeur. It basically acts how Domestic Affairs does, but grants further benefits. The same goes for the Dynasty perks that were unique. It's quite nice to have these extra things, but I don't think it's really a dramatic shakeup to how you're going to play. It's just more content, which is nice. So in summary, my thoughts on this DLC are that it's quite good. It adds fun progression through the Royal Court, it adds a lot of nice events that after multiple generations, I'm still seeing new ones, and not getting a lot of repeats, which is good. The culture splitting and hybridizing I think makes the sandbox far more interesting, and the unique ways to create artifacts make them feel a little bit more personal. However, the 3D throne room itself serves as just this awkward viewing gallery for what often feels like mannequins. It doesn't really make dilemmas any more interesting in the way that they're presented. In fact, I think normal event windows are just far more interesting most of the time. This aspect of the DLC seems to be the reason for the really high price point, which is really my biggest issue with it. Money and price is subjective, to an extent, right? You might not care about $30, or you might care a lot about it, but there's no denying that the price is vastly higher than similar content offerings from Paradox. And it's also way higher than what's being offered by competitors in the genre. For that reason, I can't really recommend it at full price. I think there's better things to spend your money on, but I do think it's a good DLC. But it's about double what I would be willing to pay for it. It should also be mentioned that you can buy the Royal Edition of CK3, which includes Northern Lords and Royal Court, and a yet-to-be-announced DLC. So that offering in terms of price seems to be way more in line with what's reasonable. I also have an affiliate link in the description if you want to pick up the base game or any of the DLCs or the Royal Court or Paradox titles very, very cheap, so consider checking that out if you are interested in saving some money. Lastly, if you've made it this far, I just want to say thanks for watching. Truly, my reviews are often late because I am blacklisted by Paradox, and these types of games take a long time to understand, process, and communicate back to you. And then it's just very difficult to grow when the majority of people interested follow channels dedicated to Crusader Kings or Paradox, and they get the content out days if not weeks before the release. So I just want to say thank you. You know, your time is valuable, and taking the time to listen or watch what I have to say is a great privilege, as corny as it sounds. If you want to help support further, of course, liking the video, sharing it really helps. Subscribing or being a channel member is huge, but of course, just watching this far helps as well. So thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next one.
Hey guys, thank you very much for watching, and remember, if you want to support this series directly, you can click the join button to become a channel member. Doing so will get your name in the credits, as well as loyalty badges and emotes to use in the comments. If you don't see the join button, it means the video has been copyright claimed, but you can still join from the channel page on desktop. You can also link your account to our Discord to get a special role on there that'll give you access to the Senate House and a few other perks.